Now let's talk about Azure services. Now Azure services have 18 categories and more than 200 services, so we clearly can't go through all of them. It has services that cover compute, AI and machine learning, integration, management tools, identity, DevOps, web, and so much more. You're going to have a hard time trying to find a domain that Azure doesn't cover. And if it doesn't cover it now, you can be certain they're working on it as we speak. So first, let's start with the compute services. First, virtual machine. With this service, what you're getting to do is to create a virtual machine of Linux or Windows operating system. It's easily configurable. You can add RAM, you can decrease RAM, you can add storage, remove it. All of it is possible in a matter of seconds. Now let's talk about the second service, cloud service. Now with this, you can create an application within the cloud, and all of the work after you deploy it, deploying the application that is taken care of by Azure, which includes, provisioning the application, load balancing, ensuring that the application is in good health, and all of the other things are handled by Azure. Next up, let's talk about Service Fabric. Now with Service Fabric, the process of developing a microservice is greatly simplified. So you might be wondering, what exactly is a microservice? Now a microservice is basically an application that consists of smaller applications coupled together. Next up, functions. Now with functions, you can create applications in any programming language that you want. Another very important part is that you don't have to worry about any hardware components. You don't have to worry what RAM you require or how much storage you require. All of that is taken care of by Azure. All you need is to provide the code to Azure and it'll execute it, and you don't have to worry about anything else. Now let's talk about some networking services. First up, we have Azure CDN, or the Content Delivery Network. Now the Azure CDN service is basically for delivering web content to users. Now this content is of high bandwidth and can be transferred or can be delivered to any person across the world. Now these are actually a network of servers that are placed in strategic positions across the world so that the customers can obtain this data as fast as possible. Next up, we have ExpressRoute. Now with this, you can actually connect your on-premise network onto the Microsoft cloud or any of the services that you want through a private connection. So the only communication that happens is between your on-premise network and the service that you want. Then you have virtual network. Now with virtual network, you can have any of the Azure services communicate with each other in a secure manner, in a private manner. Next, we have Azure DNS. So Azure DNS is a hosting service which allows you to host their DNS or domain name system domains in Azure. So you can host your application using Azure DNS. Now for the storage services. First up, we have disk storage. With disk storage, you're given a cost-effective option of choosing HDD or solid state drives to go along with your virtual machines based on your requirements. Then you have blob storage. Now this is actually optimized to ensure that they can store massive amounts of unstructured data, which can include text data or even binary data. Next, you have file storage, which is a managed file storage and can be accessible via the SMB protocol or the server message block protocol. And finally, you have queue storage. Now with queue storage, you can provide durable message queuing for an extremely large workload. And the most important part is that this can be accessed from anywhere in the world. Now, let's talk about how Azure can be used. Firstly, for application development. It could be any application, mostly web applications. Then you can test the application, see how well it works. You can host the application on the internet. You can create virtual machines like I mentioned before. With the service, you can create these virtual machines of any size or RAM that you want. You can integrate and sync features. You can collect and store matrices. For example, how the data works, how the current data is, how you can improve upon it. All of that is possible with these services. And you have virtual hard drives, which is an extension of the virtual machines where these services are able to provide you a large amount of storage where data can be stored.
So the wide variety of services available on Azure includes artificial intelligence plus machine learning plus analytic services to get to give us a good visual of how the data or how the application is performing or the type of the category of data stored, and to read from the logs, and variety of compute services, different VMs with different size and different operating systems, different containers available, different type of databases available, a lot of developer tools that are available for us, and identity service to manage our users in the Azure cloud. And those users can be integrated or federated with, let's say, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn. So there are some external federation services. They can be used to integrate with our identity system, IoT services, IoT tools and technologies available, and management tools to manage the users. Creating identity is one, and then managing them on top of it is a totally different thing. And we have tools, technologies to manage the users. Cool services for data migration. Data migration is now made simple. Tools and technologies available for mobile application development. And I can plan my own network in the cloud with the networking services. I can implement my own security, both Azure provided and third-party security services on Azure cloud. That's now possible. And a lot of storage options available in the cloud. So these are just a glimpse of the big list of services available in Azure cloud. So that was a glimpse of what's available in the cloud. Let's talk about the services in specific. Let's take compute for example. Whenever we're building a new application or deploying existing ones, the Azure Compute Service provides the infrastructure we need to run and maintain our application. We can easily tap in the capacity that Azure Cloud Service has, and we can scale our compute requirement on demand. We can also containerize our application. We have the option of choosing Windows or Linux VM machine and take the advantage of the flexible options Azure provides for us to migrate our VMs to Azure and a lot more. And these compute services also include a full-fledged identity solution, meaning integration with Active Directory in the cloud or on-premises, and a lot more. Let's look at some of the services that this compute domain provides. Some of the services the compute domain provides are virtual machines. And this Azure Virtual Machines gives us the ability to develop and manage a virtual computer environment or a virtualized environment inside Azure's cloud environment, that too in a virtual private network. Now we will talk about virtual private network at a later point, but as of now just know that there are a lot of services available in Azure Compute Service that we can get benefited from. We can always choose from a very wide range of compute options. For example, we have an option to choose the operating system. We have the option to choose whether the system should be in on-premises or in the cloud, or do we want to maintain the environment both in on-premises and in the cloud. We have the option of choosing the operating system, whether we want to use our own operating system with some software attached to it, or do we want to go and buy the operating system from the cloud, from Azure Marketplace. And these are just a few of the options available for us when we want to buy the compute environment. And these compute environments are easily scalable, meaning we can easily scale our VM instances from one instance to thousands of virtual machines in a matter of minutes, or simply put, in a couple of button clicks. And all these services are available on a pay for what we use model, meaning there is no upfront cost. We use the service and then pay for the services that we have used. There is no literal long-term commitment when it comes to using virtual machines in the cloud. And most of the services are built on a pay per minute billing basis. Alright, and at no point, because of the pay per minute billing model, at no point we will be overpaying for any of the services. That's attractive, isn't it? Now let's talk about batch service. Now batch service is always independent, regardless of whether you choose Windows or Linux, it's going to run fairly well. And with batch service, we can take advantage of the environment's unique features. And not only that, in short, the batch service helps us to manage the whole batch environment, and also it helps to schedule the jobs. Now this Azure batch service actually runs on a large scale parallel and high performance computing. Because of that, batch jobs are highly efficient in Azure. And when we run batch services, this Azure batch creates a pool of computer nodes and installs the needed applications that we want to run, and then it schedules jobs to those individual nodes in those pools. As a customer, there is no need for us to install a cluster, or there is no need for us to install a software that actually schedules the jobs, or even to manage or even to scale those infrastructure or the software, because everything is managed by Azure. And this batch service is a platform as a service. There is no additional charge for using this batch service, except for, the only charges that we'll be paying is for the virtual machines that the service uses, and the storage that we will be using, of course, and the networking services that we would be using for this batch service. Let's summarize. This batch service, we have a choice of operating system that we can pick and use, and it scales by itself. Now, the alternative for the batch would be queues, but in queues, we'll have to pre-provision and pay for the infrastructure even if we're not using it. But with a batch, we only pay for what we use. And this batch service helps us to manage the application, manage the scheduling as a whole, as if they are just one thing. As next thing in the compute domain, let's talk about this Fabric service. Now, this Fabric service is actually a distributed system platform that helps us to package, deploy, and manage a scalable and a very reliable microservice and containers. And what does it help? This Azure Fabric service helps us, or it helps the developers and administrators, so they can avoid the complex infrastructure problems, and they can focus only on implementing workloads or taking care of their development, taking care of their application instead of spending time on infrastructure. So what's Service Fabric? Service Fabric, it provides runtime capabilities and life cycle management to applications that are composed of microservices, no infrastructure management at all. And with Service Fabric, we can easily scale the application to tens or hundreds or even to thousands of machines. Here, machines represent containers. As next thing in compute domain, let's talk about virtual machine scale set. Now, this virtual machine scale set, it lets us to create a group of identical load balanced VMs. I just want to mention it again. It helps us to manage a group identical and load balanced VMs. The number of instances or the number of VM instances in a scale set can increase or decrease in response to the demand or in response to a schedule that we define. The resources needed on a Monday morning is not the same as that would be required on a Saturday or a Sunday morning. All right. And even within the day, the resources that would be needed in the beginning of the business hour is not the resources that would be needed at noon or, after 8 or 9 in the evening. So the demands could actually vary in the environment, and this scale set helps us to take care of the varying demand or take care of the different infrastructure requirement at a different schedule throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, or could be throughout the year as well. The scale set also allows us to provide high availability to our applications, and it helps us to centrally manage, configure, and update a large number of VMs as if they are just one thing. Now you might ask, well, virtual machines are enough. Why would we need a virtual machine scale set? Just like I said, this virtual machine scale set helps us with a greater redundancy and improved performance for our applications. And those applications can be accessed through a load balancer that actually distributes the requests to the application instances. So in a nutshell, this virtual machine scale set, it helps us to create a large number of identical virtual machines, number one. And with scale set, we can increase or decrease the virtual machines. With virtual machine scale set, we can centrally manage and configure and update a big group of VMs. And it's a great use case when it comes to big data or container workloads. As next thing in compute domain, let's talk about cloud services. Now, this Azure Cloud Service is actually a platform as a service, and it's very friendly. In fact, it is designed for applications that support scalability, or an application that requires scalability or reliability, and on top of it, you want them to be very inexpensive to operate. So Azure Cloud Service provides all these. So where would this cloud service run? Well, it runs on a VM, but it's a platform as a service. VMs are infrastructure as a service, and when we run applications on VM through cloud service, it becomes platform as a service. So here is how you got to be thinking. With infrastructure as a service like VMs, we first create and configure the environment, and then we run applications on top of it. Let's look at the responsibility. The responsibility for us in VM is that we manage everything end to end, like deploying new patches, picking the versions of the operating system, and making sure they are intact and all that stuff. It's all managed by us. But on the contrary, with platform as a service, it's as if the environment is already ready. All that you have to do is deploy your application in it and manage the platform. Manage the platform not as an administrator, because all the administration is taken care by Azure, like deploying new versions of the operating system. It's all handled by the Azure. So we deploy the application and we manage the application. That's it. Infrastructure management is handled by Azure. So what does cloud service provide? This cloud service provides a platform where we can write the application code, and we don't have to worry about hardware. Simply hand over the code and cloud service takes care of it. So no worry on the hardware at all. So responsibilities like patching, what do we do if something crashes? How do I update the infrastructure? How do I manage the maintenance or the downtime in the underlying infrastructure? All that is handled by Azure. It also provides a good testing environment for us. We can simply run the code, test it before it's actually released to the production. I want to expand a bit on these testing applications. So this Azure Cloud Service, it actually gives us a staging environment for testing a new release without it affecting the existing release, which actually reduces the customer downtime. So we can run the application, test it, and anytime that's ready for production, all that's needed for us to do to move it to production is simply to swap the staging environment into the production environment, and the old production environment will now become the new staging environment, where we can add more to it and then swap it back at a later point. So it kind of gives us a swappable environment for testing our applications. And not only that, it gives us health monitoring alerts. It helps us to monitor the health and availability of our application. And there is a dashboard we can benefit from when we use Azure Cloud Services, and that shows the key statistics all in one place. And we can also set up real-time alerts to warn when a service availability or a certain metrics that we are concerned about degrades. As next thing in compute domain, let's talk about functions. Now, functions are serverless computing. Many times, if you heard about Azure being serverless, a lot of time they are referencing, or the person who's talking to you is referencing to serverless computing or Azure Functions, which is a serverless computing service hosted on Microsoft Azure. The main motive of a function is to accelerate and simplify application development. Functions helps us to run code on demand without we need to pre-provision or manage any Azure infrastructure. So Azure Functions are script or a piece of code that gets run in response to an event that you want to handle. So in short, we can just write a code that you need for a problem at hand without actually worrying about the whole application or the infrastructure that will be running that code. And the best of all the best is when we use functions, we only pay for the time that our code runs. So what does functions provide, or what does Azure Functions provide? Azure Functions allow users to build applications using serverless simple functions with a programming language of our choice. So the current programming languages that are supported is C#, F#, Node.js, Java, and PHP. So here we really don't have to worry about provisioning or maintaining servers. If a code requires more resource, yes, Azure Functions handles, or it provides the additional resources needed by the code. And the best part is we only pay for the amount of time the functions are running, not the resources, but the amount of time the function is running. As next thing, and moving to the new domain, let's talk about the container domain in Azure. Now the container domain, or the container service, it allows us to quickly deploy a production ready Kubernetes or a Docker Swarm cluster. Now what's a container? A container is a standard unit of software that packages of code and all its dependencies so the applications run quickly and reliably from one computing environment to another. It could be testing to staging to development environment to staging to production, or from one production to another production, or on premises to cloud, or one cloud to another cloud, vice versa. Now imagine we had an option not to worry about the VM and just focus on the application. Well, that's exactly what containers helps us achieve. So these container instances enable us to focus on applications and not worrying about managing VMs, or not worrying about learning the new tools required to manage the VMs or even the deployment. And our applications that we create, they run in a container. And running in a container is what helps us to achieve all these, not being able to manage or not needing to manage the virtual machines. So these containers, they can be deployed into the cloud using a single command if you're using a command line interface, and a couple of button clicks if we are using the Azure portal. And these containers are kept lightweight, but they are equally secure as virtual machines. Let's talk about container service as next thing. The container service, or sometimes called as Azure Kubernetes service, it helps us to manage the containers. Container is one thing, and a service that's used to manage the container is another thing. Now this Kubernetes service, or ACS, it helps us to manage the containers. So let's expand on this a bit. So this Azure Container Service, or ACS, it actually provides a way to simplify the creation, configuration, and management of a cluster of virtual machines that are pre-configured to run containerized applications on top of them. Deploying these containers might take like 15 to 20 minutes, or deploying the virtual machines that run containers in it might take 15 to 20 minutes. And once they are provisioned, we can actually manage them by using simple SSH tunnel into them. And this ACS, when it runs applications from Docker images. What does that mean? Docker images makes sure that the applications the container runs are fully portable. Images are portable. And ACS also helps us to orchestrate the container environment. Not only that, it also helps us to ensure that these applications that we run in containers can be scaled to thousands or even tens of thousands of containers. So in a nutshell, managing an existing application into a container and running it using AKS or ACS is really easy, or that's what it is all about, to make the application management or migration easy. Now, managing the container-based architecture, and we discussed that containers could be tens or even tens of thousands of containers. So managing them is made simple using this container services. And even training of model using a large data set in a complex and resource intensive environment, this AKS helps us to simplify that environment. Alright, as next thing in container domain, let's talk about container registry. We spoke about registry a little bit when we spoke about Docker images. So container registry is a single place where we can store our images, which are Docker images. When we use containers, it's Docker images that we use for our image purposes. So these container images are a central registry that can be used to ease container development by easing the storage and management of container images. So there we can store all kind of images like Docker Swarm, or the images used in Docker Swarm are in Kubernetes. Everything can be stored in container registry in Azure. Now, anytime we store a container image, it provides us an option for geo replication. What that means is that we can efficiently manage a single registry replicated across multiple regions. Now, this geo replication, it actually enables us to manage global deployments, assuming we are having an environment that requires a global deployment. So it helps us to manage global deployments as one entity, because we are geo-replicating. We would be updating, we would be editing one image, and that image gets replicated throughout the global replication centers we would have set up. And so just one editing would have actually edited the global images, and those global images would have provisioned the global application. So one edit, replication, and then provisioning of the applications global wide. And this replication also helps us network latency, because anytime an application needs to deploy, it does not have to rely on a single source which can be reached only through high latency network. Because we have global replications around the world, anytime the application wants to check back, it would check back the application which is in a very nearby location for the application itself. Global replication means that we are managing it as a single entity that's being replicated across the multiple regions in the globe. As next thing in our learning, let's talk about Azure databases. Now, these Azure databases are relational. In fact, they have many flavors in them. We're going to look at different flavors, SQL, NoSQL, cache type of database that Azure offers. So we're going to learn one at a time, or we're going to learn one by one. So this Azure SQL database is a relational database. In fact, it's a relational database as a service. It's managed by Azure. We don't get to do a lot of management in it. So it's a relational database as a service based on Microsoft SQL Server database engine. And this database is a high performance database. It's very reliable, and it's very secure as well. And this high reliability, high performance, and for this high security, we really don't have to do anything. It comes along with it, and it's managed by Azure. And there are two things that I definitely need to mention about Azure SQL database. That is, it's an intelligent service. Number one, it's fully managed by Azure, and it also has this one good thing, which is it has built-in intelligence that learns app patterns and adapts to maximize performance and reliability and data protection of the application. That's something that's not found in many of the other cloud providers that I'm aware of, so I thought I'll mention it. So it uses built-in intelligence to learn about the user's database patterns and helps improve performance and protection. And migration or importing data is very easy when it comes to Azure SQL database. So it can be readily or immediately used for analytic reporting and intelligent applications in Azure. As next thing, let's talk about Azure Cosmos DB. Now, Azure Cosmos DB is a database service that is for NoSQL type, and it's created to provide low latency and an application that scales dynamically or that scales rapidly. Now, this Azure Cosmos DB is a globally distributed service, and it's a multi-model database. This can be provisioned in a click of a button. That's all we got to do if we need to provision an Azure Cosmos DB in the Azure. It helps with scaling the database. We can elastically and independently scale throughput and storage across this database and in any of the Azure geographic regions. It provides a good throughput, it provides good latency, it provides good availability, and it provides, or Azure promises, a comprehensive SLA that no other database can offer. That's the best part about Cosmos DB. So this Cosmos DB was built with global distribution in mind, and it's built with the horizontal scale in mind. And all this we can use by only paying for what we have used. And remember, the difference between Azure Cosmos DB and the SQL database is that Azure Cosmos DB supports NoSQL, whereas SQL doesn't. Alright, few other things about Azure Cosmos DB is it allows users to use key value graph, column, family, and document data. It also gives users a number of API options like SQL, JavaScript, MongoDB, and few others that you might want to check in the document at the time of reading. And the best part here is that all that we mentioned, we get to use only by paying for the amount of storage and throughput that are required. And the storage and the throughput can be elastically scaled based on the requirement of that R. Alright, let's talk about Redis cache. Discussion about Azure database won't be complete without we talking about Redis cache. Now, Redis cache is a secure data cache. It's also sometimes called as messaging broker that provides high throughput and low latency access to data for the applications. Now, Redis cache is based on a popular open source caching product, which is Redis, sometimes called as Redis cache. Now, what's the use case? It's typically used to cache to improve the performance and scalability of a system that rely heavily on backend data stores. Now, performance when we use Redis cache is improved by temporarily copying the frequently accessed data to a fast storage located very close to the application. Now, with Redis cache, this fast storage is located in memory with Redis cache instead of being loaded from the actual disk in the database itself. Now, this Redis cache can also be used as an in-memory data structure store. Not only that, it can be used as a distributed non-relational database and a message broker. So there are a variety of use cases for this Redis cache. And by using Redis cache, the application performance is improved by taking advantage of the low latency and the high throughput performance that this Redis cache engine provides. So to summarize, this Redis cache, when we use Redis cache, data is stored in the memory instead of the disk to ensure that there is high throughput and low latency when the application needs to read the data. It provides various levels of scaling without any downtime or interference. Now, this Redis cache is actually backed by Redis server, and it supports string, hashes, linked list, and various other data structures. Now let's talk about security and identity services. Now, identity management in specific is a process of authenticating first and then authorizing using security principles. Now, not only that, identity management involves controlling information about those principal identities. You might ask, now what's a principal identity? Now, identity or principal identity are services, applications, users, groups, and a lot more. The speciality about this identity management is that it not only helps authenticate and authorize principals in cloud, it also helps authenticate and authorize principals or resources on premises, especially when you run an hybrid cloud environment. So all these services and features that this identity management helps us to get additional level of validation, like identity management can provide multi-factor authentication. It can provide access policies based on condition, a permit or deny based on condition. It can also monitor suspicious activity, and not only that, it can also report it. It can also help generate alerts for potential security issues, and in a way to mitigate it, can send us an alert so we can get involved and prevent a security accident from happening. So let's talk more about identity management. So some of the services under security and identity management are Azure Security Center. Now, this Azure Security Center provides security management and threat protection across the workloads in both cloud and in the hybrid environment. It helps control user access and application control to stop any malicious activity if present. It helps us to find and fix vulnerabilities before they can be even exploited. It integrates very well with analytic methods that helps us to identify, or it gives us the intelligence to identify or detect attacks and prevent them before it can actually happen. And it also works seamlessly with hybrid environments. So you don't have to have one policy for on-premises and one policy for the cloud. It's now a unified service, both for on-premises and the cloud. The next service in security and identity would be Key Vault. Now, a Key Vault is a service or a feature that helps safeguard the cryptographic keys and any other secrets used by the cloud applications and the services. In other words, this Azure Key Vault is a tool for securely storing and accessing the secrets of the environment, the secret keys. Now, a secret is anything that you really want to have a very tight control access, like the certificates, like the passwords, stuff like that. Now, if I tell you what Key Vault actually solves, that would actually explain what Key Vault is. Now, Key Vault is used in secrets management. It's helped in securely storing the tokens, the passwords, the certificates. It helps in key management. It really helps in creating and controlling the encryption keys that we would use to encrypt data. It helps in certificate management. Talking about certification management, it helps us to easily provision, manage, and deploy public and private SSL, TLS certificates in Azure, and a lot more. So in a nutshell, this key vault, it provides users the ability to provision new vaults and keys in just a matter of minutes, all that in a single command or all that in a couple of button clicks. It also helps users to centrally manage their keys, secrets, and policies. Next in the list, let's talk about Azure Active Directory. Now, Azure Active Directory, it helps us to create intelligent-driven access policies to limit resource usage and manage user identities. What does that mean? Now, this Azure Active Directory is a cloud-based Active Directory and identity management service. Now, Azure Active Directory combines, it's actually a combination of the core directory services plus application access management plus identity protection. And one good thing about this Azure, in fact, there are a lot of good things, but especially when you're running hybrid environments, you might wonder, well, how this Azure Active Directory is going to behave. Now, this Azure Active Directory is built to work on-premises and cloud environment as well. Not only that, it also works seamlessly with mobile applications as well. So in a nutshell, this Azure Active Directory, it acts as an central point of identity and access management for our cloud environment. It also provides good security solutions that protect against unauthorized access of our app and the data. Now that we've discussed about security and identity, let's talk about the management tools that Azure has to offer. Azure provides built-in management and account governance tools that helps administrators and developers, that helps them to keep their resources secure and very compliant. And again, it helps both in on-premises and in the cloud environment. And these management tools help us to monitor the infrastructure, monitor the applications. It also helps in provisioning and configuring resources. It also helps in updating apps. It helps in analyzing threats, taking backup of the resources, build disaster recoveries. It also helps in applying policies and conditions to automate our environment. We use Azure management tools, and it's also used in cost control methods. So this Azure management plays a wide role across the Azure services. And in the management tools, first comes the Azure Advisor. Now this Azure Advisor, it acts as a guide to educate us about Azure best practices. It throws recommendations that we can select on the basis of the category of service, and it also provides the impact it can have, or the impact that would happen in our environment if we follow the recommendations given. And recommendations are, first one is the recommendations are kind of templatized, and it throws the templatized recommendations. Not only that, it also provides customized recommendations on the basis of the configuration, on the basis of our usage patterns. And these recommendations are not hard. It's not like something that it recommends and then just leaves us hanging there. These recommendations provided are very easy to follow, very easy to implement and see results. You can think of Azure Advisor as a very personalized cloud consultant that helps you to follow best practices to optimize our deployments. It kind of analyzes our resources, our configurations, our usage, and then it recommends a solution for us that really helps in improving the cost effectiveness, improving the performance, improving high availability, and improving security in our Azure environment. So with this Azure Advisor, we can get a proactive, actionable, and personalized best practice recommendations. Now, you don't have to be an expert. Just follow the Azure Advisor and your environment is going to be good. It also helps in improve the performance, security, high availability of our environment. And also it helps in bringing down the overall Azure spend. And the best part is it's a free service that analyzes our Azure usage and provides recommendations, how we can optimize our Azure resource to reduce cost. And reduce cost at the same time boost the performance, helps in strengthening the security and improve the overall reliability of our environment. Next in the list would be Network Watcher. Now, this Network Watcher helps users identify and gain insights in the overall network performance and the health of the overall environment. Now, these Azure Watchers provides enough tools to monitor, to diagnose, to view the metrics, and to enable or disable logs, which means generate and collect the logs for resources in the Azure Virtual Network. So with Network Watcher, you can monitor and diagnose issues in networking without even logging into the virtual machines. With just the logs, which are real time, we can actually come to a conclusion what could be wrong in a certain resource, in a VM or in a database, by just looking at the logs. And not only that, it's used for analytic or to gain some intelligence of what's happening in our network. We can gain a lot of insight to the current network traffic pattern using the security group flow logs that this Network Watcher offers. It also helps in investigating VPN connectivity issues using detailed logs. Now, you might or might not know that VPN troubleshooting requires both parties, or it involves two parties. The person, the network administrator on this side and the network administrator on the other side. And they will have to check logs in their end, and we'll have to check logs in our end, stuff like that. But with the Network Watcher, it kind of takes it to the next level. The logs itself, we could easily identify which side is having the issue and suggest an appropriate fix. And the next in the list would be Microsoft Azure Portal. Now, this Microsoft Azure Portal, it provides a single unified console to perform various number of activities like building, not only building, managing and monitoring the web applications that we build. Now, this portal can be used to organize our environment or the appearance of the environment or the visual of the environment based on our work style. And using Azure Portal, users can control who gets to manage or access the resources, all from the Azure Portal. And this Azure Portal gives a very good visibility on the spends that happen on each resource, right? And if we can customize it, we can also identify spends based on team, spends based on days, spends based on department, stuff like that. So it kind of gives us a good visual of where the money is spending or where is the bill consumed within the Azure environment. Next in the list would be Azure Resource Manager. Now, Azure Resource Manager enables us to manage the usage of the application resources. Now, we use Resource Manager to deploy, monitor, and manage solution resources as a group, as if it's one single entity. Now, the infrastructure of our application is typically made of various components, which includes virtual machine, storage, virtual network, web app, database servers, some other third-party services that we might use in our environment. And they are by nature separate services. But with Azure Resource Manager, we don't see them as different components or different entities. Instead, we see them as related services in a group that supports an application. Now, we kind of get the relation between them. Instead of, letting them spread, Azure Resource Manager identifies the relation between them and helps us to visually see them all as one or single entity. Not only that, Azure Resource Manager helps or it ensures that the resources that we provision are deployed at a constant rate along with the other application. It also helps users to visually see their resources and how they are connected, and that helps in managing the resources a lot better. Resource group also is used to control who can access the resources within the user's organization. Kind of gives you the fine-grained control over who gets to access and who does not get access. And the last one in the management tools would be automation. And this automation gives us the ability to automate, configure, and install upgrades across hybrid environments. It provides a cloud-based automation and configuration service. Not only that, this can be applied for non-Azure environments as well, which is on-premises. So some of the automation we could do is process automation, update management automation, configuration features automation, stuff like that. And this Azure automation provides complete control during the deployment, operation, and also during the decommissioning of the workloads and resources. With automation, we can actually automate time-consuming or mundane or any task that's error-prone because of human errors. Those things can be automated. So irrespective of how many times you run it, it's going to run the same way. And that really helps in reducing the overall time and also the overhead cost, because a lot of the things are automated, which means it's human error-free, which means the application is not going to break and keep running for a longer time. With automation, we can actually build a good inventory of operating system resources and configuration items all in one place with ease. And this really helps in tracking the changes and investigating the issue. Let's say something happened. Because we have automation, because it's logging the configuration changes, it's easy to track, easy to identify what has changed lately that has broken the environment, go back and fix it or kind of roll it back. That solves the problem. And that actually summarizes the Azure management tools or management services. Now let's talk about the networking tools or the networking services available in Azure. There are a variety of services, especially networking services, that Azure offers, and I'm sure it's going to be an interesting one. Let's begin our discussion with Content Delivery Network. Now, the Content Delivery Network, in short, CDN, it allows us to perform secure and a very reliable content delivery. Not only that, it also helps in accelerating the delivery time, or in other words, reducing the delivery time, also called as load times. It also helps in saving bandwidth and increases in responsiveness to the application. Let's expand on this. The Content Delivery Network is actually a distributed network of servers that can efficiently deliver web content to users. Now, CDNs, we're going to use the word CDN here. CDNs store cached content on global edge servers, also called as POPs, point of presence locations, that are very close to the end users, so the latency is minimized. It's like taking a copy of the data or taking a multiple copy of the data and storing it in different parts of the world, and whoever is requesting it, the data gets delivered to them from a server which is very locally to them. So this CDN offers developers a global solution for rapidly delivering high bandwidth content to users by caching the content in a strategically placed location which is very near to them. So these content delivery networks, it really helps in handling. That's one advantage you get for content delivery network, that's we can handle spikes and heavy loads very efficiently. And we can also run analytic against the logs that gets generated in content delivery network, which helps in gaining good insight on the workflow and what would be the future business need for that application. And this, just like a lot of other services, this is on a pay-as-you-go type. So you use the resource first and then you only pay for what you have used. The next one in networking would be ExpressRoute. Now, ExpressRoute is actually a circuit or a link that provides a direct private connection to Azure. And because it's direct, it gives low latency link to Azure. It gives good speed and reliability for the Azure data transfer. It could be on-premises to Azure. So it gives very good speed. It gives increased reliability and low latency for that connection. Let's expand on this a bit. Now, this ExpressRoute is a service that actually provides a private connection between Microsoft data center and infrastructure in our premises or in a different co-location facility that we might have. Now, these ExpressRoutes do not go over the public internet. And because they don't go over the public internet, they offer a high security, reliability, and speed and low latency compared to the connections which are in the internet. Because it's fast, because it's reliable, because it has low latency, it can be used as an extension of our existing data center. Users are not going to feel the difference whether they are accessing services from an on-premises or in the cloud environment. because latency is minimized as much as possible. Users are really not going to see the difference. And because it's a private line and not a public internet line, it can be used to build hybrid applications without compromising privacy or the performance. Now, these virtual private cloud, these express routes can be used for taking backups. If assume a backup going through the internet, that would be a nightmare. If we use express route for backups, that's going to be fast. And imagine recovering a data through the internet, from the cloud, through the internet to the on-premises in a time of disaster. That would be the worst nightmare. So these express routes can be used not only to backup, but also to recover the data. Because it provides good speed, low latency, recovering the data is going to be a lot sooner. The next product or service we're going to discuss in networking is Azure DNS. Now, Azure DNS allows us to host domain name in Azure, and these domain names come with an exceptional performance and availability. Now, Azure DNS is used to set up and manage DNS zones and records for our domain name in the cloud. Now, this Azure DNS is a service for DNS, just like the name says, and it provides name resolution by using Azure's infrastructure. And by using this domain, we can actually manage the DNS ourselves through the Azure portal with the same credential. Imagine having a DNS provider which does not even belong in our IT. Imagine that environment. We would have a separate portal to manage the DNS environment. Now, those are gone. And now we can actually manage the DNS in the very same Azure portal where we use the rest of the other services. And this Azure DNS very much integrates with other DNS service providers. It uses a global network of name servers to provide fast response to DNS queries. And these domains are having additional availability compared to the other domain service providers' availability promises. These are going to have more availability than the rest because most of the servers are maintained by Microsoft, and it helps resolve sooner. It helps resyncing. Let's say a server fails, it kind of helps resyncing with the rest of the servers. So all the Microsoft's environment, all the Microsoft's global network of name servers kind of ensures that our domain names are resolved properly, not only properly, but also are available most of the time. Right, next in the list in networking services is virtual network. I'm sure this is going to be very interesting and I'm sure you're going to like it. So this networking or virtual networking in Azure, it actually allows us to set up our own private cloud in the public cloud. It gives us an isolated and highly secure environment for our application. Let's expand on this. So this Azure Virtual Network helps us to provision Azure virtual machines, and it helps us to securely communicate with other on-premises and internet networks. It also helps in controlling the traffic that flows through or flows in and out of this virtual network to other virtual networks and to the internet. Now, this Azure virtual network, sometimes called as VNet, is actually a representation of our own network in the cloud. It's actually a logical isolation of the Azure cloud dedicated to our subscription. All our environments are provisioned in a VNet that is separate from another customer's VNets. That way we have that logical separation there. So this virtual network can also be used to provision VPNs in the cloud, so we can connect the cloud and the on-premises infrastructure and a lot more, especially in an environment where we have hybrid environment. Surely we will be using virtual network because that's going to require a VPN for secure data transfer in and out of the cloud and in and out of the on-premises environment. Alright, so it kind of gives us a boundary for all the resources. So all the traffic between the Azure resources, they kind of logically stay in between or logically stay within the Azure virtual network. And here we can design the network. It's given over to us. You can pick the IP, you can pick the routing, you can pick the subnet. A lot of freedom is given, or I would say a lot of control on how the network is designed. It's not like something that's already cooked and we only get to use it. No, we can actually build the network from the scratch. We can pick the IP address that we like. We can pick, which subnet needs to communicate with the other subnet, stuff like that. And like I said, if you are using hybrid environment, you definitely would be requiring a virtual network because it helps connect the on-premises and the cloud in a secure fashion using VPN. The last product we're going to discuss in networking is a load balancer. This load balancer actually provides application a good availability and a good network performance. So how does it work? It actually works by load balancing the traffic to and from the virtual machine and the cloud resources. Not only that, it also load balances between cloud and cross-premises virtual networks. With Azure Load Balancer, we can actually scale our application and create high availability for our services, which means our application will be available most of the time. If any of the server goes dead, the server does not get traffic. What happens if the server gets traffic? User is going to experience downtime. What happens if the server does not get traffic? User won't experience any downtime. The connection is shifted to an healthy service, so the user experiences uptime all the time. So this load balancer supports inbound and outbound scenarios, and it provides low latency. It gives high throughput of the data transfer, and we can actually scale up the flow of the TCP and UDP connections from hundreds to thousands to even millions because we have a load balancer now in between the user and the application. So how does it operate? This load balancer actually receives the traffic and it load balances the traffic to the backend pool of instances connected to it according to the rule and the health probe that we set. That's how it maintains high availability. So what does load balancer help? It helps in creation of high available scalable application in the cloud in minutes. It can be used to automatically scale the environment with the increasing application traffic. And one feature of load balancer is to check the health of the user's application instance, and it removes or it stops sending the request to the unhealthy instance and kind of shifts that connection to the healthy instance. That way a user or a connection does not get stuck with an instance that's not healthy. That's all that you need to know about the networking services. Now let's talk about the storage services or the storage domain in Azure. Now Azure Storage in general is a Microsoft managed service providing cloud storage, which basically is highly available, secure, durable, scalable, and redundant because it's all managed by Azure. We don't get to manage a lot of it. And these Azure storages are a group of storage services. They cater different needs. And the storage products include Azure Blobs, which is actually an object storage. It includes Azure Data Lake. It includes Azure Files. As you see, it includes Azure Queues. It includes Azure Tables and a lot more. But let's start our discussion with Azure Store Simple. Azure Store Simple is an hybrid cloud storage solution that actually lowers the cost of storage to nearly 60% of how much you would be actually spending without using it. So Azure Simple Storage or Store Simple is an integrated storage solution that manages the storage task between on-premises and the cloud storage. What I really like about Azure is that it's built around a hybrid environment in mind. There are a lot of other cloud providers that are there where running an hybrid environment is a big challenge. It has some compatibility. You won't be able to find an hybrid or a on-premises and cloud solution for your need, stuff like that. But with Azure, especially when it comes to storage, a lot of the things that we're going to see, it clearly is designed with hybrid environment in mind. All right, so let's come back and talk about Store Simple. So Store Simple is a very efficient, cost-effective, and a very easily manageable SAN, storage area networking solution in the cloud. I thought I'll throw in this information. The reason why it got Store Simple is really because it uses Store Simple 8000 series devices which are used in Azure Data Center. And this Store Simple or Simple Storage, it comes along with storage tiering to manage the stored data across the various storage media. So the very current data is actually stored in on-premises on solid state drives, And data that is used less frequently is stored in HDDs or hard disk drives. And the data that requires archived or that needs to be archived, very old data, let's say less frequently used data, candidate for archive, they are actually pushed to the cloud. So you see how this storage tiering automatically happens in StoreSimple. And another cool feature of StoreSimple is that it enables us to create an on-demand and scheduled backups of data and then store the data locally or in the cloud. And these backups are actually taken in the form of incremental snapshot, which means that they can be created and restored quickly. It's not a complete backup, it's an incremental backup. And these cloud snapshots, they can be critically important when there is a disaster and when there is a disaster recovery scenario, because these snapshots can be called in and they can be put on storage systems and then they become the actual data. So recovering is faster if you have proper scheduled backups or if you have frequent backups. And this StoreSimple, it really helps in easing our backup mechanism, which means it kind of eases our disaster recovery steps or procedures as well. So this StoreSimple, it can be used to automate data management, data migration, data movement, data tiering across the enterprise, both in cloud and on premises. It actually improves the compliance and accelerates the disaster recovery for our environment. And if there is one thing that's increasing every new day in our environment, that would be storage. And this StoreSimple addresses that need, and we really don't have to pre-plan or think in deep for having a proper storage, because now we have a simple storage available in the cloud, and moreover it's on a pay-as-you-go type. So not much pre-planning on storage is needed. Yes, there will be a need, but not as much as I would without the cloud or without the simple storage. And the next service under storage that we would like to discuss is the data lake store. This data lake store or storage, it's a cost-effective solution for big data analytics in specific. So let's expand this. So this data lake storage is an enterprise-wide repository for big data analytic workload. Now that's the major service that's dependent on this data lake store. And this data lake enables us to capture data of any size, of any type, and of any ingestion speed, and it kind of collects them in one single space or in one single place for operational efficiency. Operational efficiency and for analytic purpose. Hadoop in Azure is very dependent on this data lake storage. And this data lake store is designed with performance for analytics in mind. So anytime you think of, or anytime you're using analytic in the cloud, or anytime you're using Hadoop in the cloud in Azure, we are definitely using, or we will be, to the most part, or the normal procedure or the right storage to pick would be data lake store in Azure. It's designed with security in mind. So anytime we use Azure storage, we can be rest assured that we are using storage from within a data center which was built with security in mind. So this data store also uses Azure Blob storage behind the scenes for global scale, durability, and for performance. Let's talk about blob storage. Now, blob storage provides large amount of storage and scalability. Now, this blob storage is the object storage solution for Azure Cloud. Let's expand a bit on blob storage. Azure Blob Storage is Microsoft offering for object storage. Now, this blob storage is optimized for storing massive amount of unstructured data, which could be text or binary data. It's designed and it's optimized for rapid reads. If I explain to you on what scenarios we would be using blob storage, that might help you get a good understanding of what blob storage is. So it's designed, as of now it's being used in many IT environments to serve images or documents directly to the browser. It helps in storing files for distributed access. A lot of fetchers can fetch data from Azure Blob Storage. and it's currently helping users stream video and audio. It's currently being used for writing log files. It's currently being used to store data as backup and restore at a later point in times of disaster recovery. It also is used as an archiving storage in a lot of cloud IT environments. It's widely used in storing analytic data, not only storing but also running analytic query against the data stored in it. So that's a wide use case for blob storage. Not only that, in addition to all that we mentioned, it also supports versioning. So anytime somebody updates an data, a new version gets created, which means at any point I can roll back as and when needed. And it provides a lot of flexibility on optimizing the user's storage need. It also supports tiering of the data. So based on need, when I actually explore, I would find a lot of options I can pick from that suits to my unique storage environment or unique storage need. And like I said, it stores unstructured data, and this unstructured data is available for customers through REST-based object storage environment. The next product and storage service would be queue storage. Now, queue storage provides durable queues for large volume cloud services. It's a very simple and a cost-effective, durable messaging queue for large workloads. Let's expand this queue storage for a moment. Now, this queue storage is a service for storing large amount of messages that can be accessed from anywhere in the world through HTTP and HTTPS calls. A single queue or a single queue message can be up to like 24 KB in size, and a single queue can contain millions of such 24 KB in size messages. And how much can it hold? It can hold up to the total capacity of the storage account itself. So that's kind of easy to translate. How much would it hold? And this Azure Queue Storage, it provides an messaging solution between applications and components in the cloud. What does it help? It helps in designing an application for scale. It helps in decoupling the application, so it's not very dependent, or sometimes it's not at all dependent on the other application, because now we have a queue in between which kind of translates or which kind of connects or which kind of decouples both the environment. Now we have a queue in between, both the environment can scale up or scale down independently. The next in the storage service would be file storage. Let's talk about file storage. Now, these Azure files provide secure, simple, and managed cloud file shares. Now, with file share in the cloud, it actually extends the user server's on-premises performance and capacity. And a lot of familiar tools for the cloud file share management can be used along with the file storage that we're talking about. So let's expand a bit on file storage. Now, this Azure Files or Azure File Storage offers a fully managed file shares in the cloud that can be accessed via the SMB protocol, Server Message Block Protocol. Now, this Azure file shares can be mounted concurrently by cloud or in on-premises deployments. A lot of operating systems are compatible with it. Windows are compatible, Linux is compatible, Mac OS is compatible. In addition to all this being able to run on-premises and on the cloud, or being able to access from on-premises and on the cloud, it can also offer cache for caching the data and keeping it locally, so it's immediately available when needed. So that's some additional feature, I would say that's some advanced feature that it offers compared to the other file shares available in the market. Let's talk about table storage. Now, table storage is a NoSQL key value pair storage for quick deployments with large semi-structured data sets. The difference between one important thing to note with table storage is that it has a flexible data schema, and also it's highly available. Let's expand a bit on table storage. So anytime you want to pick a schema-less, a NoSQL type table storage is the one we'll end up picking. It provides an key pair attribute storage with a schema-less design. This table storage is very fast and very cost effective for many of the applications, and for the same amount of data, it's a lot cheaper when you compare it with the traditional SQL data or data storage. So some of the things that we can store in the table storage are, of course, they're going to be flexible data sheets, such as user data for web application, address books, device information, and other types of metadata for our service requirements. And it can have any number of tables up to the capacity limit of the storage account. Now, this is not possible with SQL. This is only possible with NoSQL, especially with table storage in Azure. Explanation of storage really concluded the length and breadth of the explanation this CEO was giving his IT personnel. But this IT personnel is not done with it yet. He still has a question even after this lengthy discussion, and his question was, well, there are a lot of other cloud providers available. What made you specifically choose Azure? I mean, from the kind of question that he asked, we can say that he is very curious, and he definitely had asked a very thoughtful question. So his CEO went on and started to explain about the other capabilities of Azure, or how it kind of outruns the rest of the cloud providers. So he again started his discussion, but from a different angle now. So he started to explain what are the capabilities or how Azure is better than the competitors. So he started with explaining the platform as a service capabilities. And I'm going to tell you what the CEO told his IT person. So this platform as a service, or in platform as a service, the infrastructure management is completely taken care by Microsoft, allowing users to focus completely on the innovation. No more infrastructure management responsibilities. Go and focus on innovation. That's a fancy way of saying it. When we buy platform as a service, that's what we get. We can contribute our time on innovation and not just maintaining the infrastructure. And Azure especially is .NET friendly. Azure supports the .NET programming language, and it is built or designed, or it is optimized to work with old and new applications deployed using .NET programming framework. So if your application is .NET, most of the time you would end up picking Azure. I mean, if you try to compare, most of the time you would end up picking Azure as your cloud service provider. And the security offerings that Azure offers is it's designed based on the security development lifecycle, which is an industry-leading assurance process. When we buy services from Azure, it assures that the environment is designed based on security development lifecycle. And like I mentioned many times in the past, and I would like to mention it again, Azure has well thought about the hybrid environments, which a lot of other cloud providers have failed. So it's very easy to set up an hybrid environment, to migrate the data or not to migrate the data and still run a hybrid environment. They work seamlessly with Azure, because Azure provides seamless connection across on-premises data centers and the public cloud. It also has a very gentle learning curve. If you look at the documentation, it's picture rich, and the documentations are neat and clear. It would encourage you to learn more. It would encourage you to think and imagine and try easily get a grasp of how services work. So it has a very gentle learning curve. Azure allows the utilization of technologies that several businesses have used for years. So there is a big history behind it. It has a very gentle learning curve. The certifications, the documentations, the stage-by-stage certification levels, it's all very gentle learning curve, which is generally missing in other cloud service providers. Now, this would really impress the CTOs or people working in finance and budgeting. If an organization is already using Microsoft software, they can definitely go and avail or be bold and ask for a discount that can reduce the overall Azure spending. In other words, overall pricing of the Azure. So that's what helped, or they are the information that helped the CEO pick Azure as his cloud service provider. And then the CEO goes on and talks about the different companies that are currently using Azure.